In this lecture, we'll talk about language, gender, and power. How language help us to understand the gender and various roles of gender, and how power may be associated with the use of language by different genders. In the beginning, I'll talk about the enactment of gender in language use, how gender is enacted through our language use. When we use a certain word, terminology, expressions, or language styles, speaking styles, how they reflect our gender. In this regard, there is an important term, gendered, which is very important to be understood in order to discriminate between the gendered and a general talk about the gender in the language use. Gender is something, or it happens when gender is in action in our talk, and especially in action in some typical or in a biased way, where we show preference for a certain gender, and we try to deplore or try to ignore the other gender. Therefore, such language may be biased based on gender. So we call this gendered language in other ways, or roughly speaking, or in a more sophisticated, or you could see in a more polite way, we could say something in where gender is in action. We could probably may call it gendered. Gender is something we grow up with. We are born with certain abilities, physical abilities. Here we need to mark the difference between gender and the sex. Sex is something of which we are biologically made of. For example, males are endowed with certain physical features which make them male, and females are endowed with certain physical features which make them female. And their construction of body, or their construction of body, especially based on various natural features, may be called as sex. Whereas gender is something which we construct as our identity in a society. So people do develop their associations with their genders at very early stages in their life. For example, we see that our kids, male kids, they develop the habits of males very rapidly. They would play with the toys which are associated with males, and the female kids, they would play with the toys which are usually associated with females in a society. For example, female kids, even they may be small, they would like to play with dolls instead of other toys which are associated with males. So that actually give us a clue. The children at a very early age in their life, they develop a kind of understanding of their overall gender. We can also see that female children learn that pink is the color of girls, so they develop an association with pink color. They like pink dresses in most of the situations and things related to pink. Even with the bigger people, grown-up people, we can see there has been various studies where we have seen the use of language in relation to gender. Historically, in efforts to describe and explain the discrimination against women in USA, one of the biggest effort has been, or the focus has been, on the use of language, or women's use of language, how women use a language that shows their subordination to their male counterparts in certain ways. So language use is very much gendered according to many researchers. Here is a list of characteristics of female talk, which shows their certain features and their gender, and this comes to us from Lakoff. According to her, there are more forms that convey impreciseness. Women use more forms which convey impreciseness in their talk, For example, words like so, such, instead of concrete or definite words. Women use hedges more, of all kinds. The words like perhaps, maybe, kind of, sort of, sometimes to show politeness or association with other people. Their intonation patterns provoke questions, show uncertainty, or they show some need for approval to other interactants in the talk. They also show indirectness for the sake of politeness, and they also are more collaborative than competitive in the talks. So these are some of the features of the talk which do have pragmatic meaning in various situations and give us a clue about female gender talk. Tannen, however, thinks that this may not be because of subordination or of females. Rather, it could be because of various cultural variations, and the enactment of dominance cannot be related only to certain linguistic realizations, for example, indirectness, interruptions, or topic shifts. According to Tannen, women are as likely to overlap others' talk and steal turns at meetings as men. Similarly, she also cites certain other linguistic strategies, for example, silence versus talkativeness, then topic raising, assertiveness, where the impression of dominance might simply result from style difference instead of any gender difference. So there are different views about it. The evidence of the universality of the language or of the use of gendered language comes from the fact that some people believe, especially the feminist way of thinking, argues that the language depicts women as lesser members of the society. According to Lakoff, many books have been written on the gender-biased language in English especially, and they focus on the excessive use of he as compared to she. In situations where a neutral pronoun would work, we would prefer to use he instead of she. There are certain uses of language, from word choice to speaking styles, which are still linked negatively to female gender and serve to construct and reinforce social differences. In this regard, we might remember that cultural differences play a very important role. For example, these gender behaviors or linguistic patterns, strategies do vary from culture to culture. So without reaching before we reach to any conclusion of gender enactment in language, we should also keep in mind and look into closely the culture in which that communication is taking place.